Hey, CityCast listeners, it's Megan. If you've been to the Strip, in the last 10 years, you know a lot has changed. And in a lot of ways, the anchor to all that is the Strip District Terminal. The historic 5-block building used to be the source for all the produce in Pittsburgh. And now it's an all-day destination for shopping, dining, working out, and more. There's the market on Saturdays, performances on Sundays, parking and retail discounts on Tuesdays. Check it all out for yourself in person and at stripdistrictterminal.com.
Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, the Synagogue shooting trial ended last week when the man who killed 11 worshippers at a Squirrel Hill synagogue was sentenced to death. It was a long trial with lots of challenging testimony, and someone close to me attended almost every day, my mom. Her name is Surloff, and I'm talking to her about why it felt important to be there. It's Tuesday, August 8th. I'm Mallory Falk, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about.
One of the moments of levity was the woman who is head of the 1027 Healing Partnership, which was formed to provide support and therapy to the community and really to anyone who needed it after the shooting and continuing up to today. Her name is Maggie Feinstein, but we call her either the Candy Lady or Sugar Mama because there was a business apparently that was kind enough to offer free candy. Maggie would come in and fill her pockets every day with just tons of hard candies. And she would walk around the different halls of the courthouse because there were people in different locations handing out hard candies with a smile on her face. And so just, a friendly smile, a greeting, a hello, and a piece of hard candy gave us a moment of, just really a small moment, but a teeny moment of levity in the midst of the horror.
You went almost every day. Why did you want to attend?
Just by way of background, this happened in my own backyard. So I had been members of 2 of the 3 synagogues that were attacked. I grew up in Tree of Life, and I raised my family, including you, at Tree of Life. And then at the time of the shooting, I was a member of Dor Hadash, and actually I was the president at the time of the shooting. This was family, friends. And as a result of that, it was important to me to be at the trial to represent my congregation, Dor Hadash, and also to provide whatever measure of support, no matter how tiny that might be, to the survivors and the victims' families. These are people that I knew, to have an opportunity firsthand directly to once again thank the first responders, to thank the team of prosecutors who worked so tirelessly to get us to the point that we got to. But also there was a part of me that became clear during the trial, and this is certainly not about me, Mallory, so I hope you'll understand. I do not mean to suggest in any way that I was a victim here. But I, attended the Saturday services at Dor Hadash, not every Saturday, but many of them. And that day, I was going to services, and I was going late because I was a little under the weather. And I happened to arrive at the synagogue at the same time as the SWAT teams. I was at the corner of Shady and Hastings, and when I got to the corner, I just saw all these vehicles rushing by, and I saw an entire line of police cars that were parked all the way down Shady Avenue from, the cross-section where Tree of Life is. And so when I was sitting in the courtroom on the first day, I was thinking to myself, and certainly the first thought I had wasn't about me, but it did go through my mind, looking at the defendant, this man just sitting there in his, button-down shirt and sweater and khaki pants, expressionless, that man would have shot and killed me. He wanted to kill every Jew he could find there that day. So personally, I felt the need to see him tried, convicted, and sentenced, and it was a relief to me when it happened.
And I know there were some other reasons as well that you wanted to be there, kind of related to just how historic this trial was.
Right. So As a Jew, as a lawyer, this was an extremely important moment in history. Obviously, there have been many times in the history of the Jewish faith where Jews have been persecuted, sometimes at the hands of state government. And here we had the state prosecuting the perpetrator of the crime. And I've always had an interest in trials and in history, and so when you combine the two, I've always found interesting reading about, sort of on a large scale, the Nuremberg trials, and on a much smaller scale, the Eichmann trial or Klaus Barbie.
And this is for trials of Nazis.
Of Nazis, right. So the fact that I was able to be here and in person hear a trial, witness a trial, one that I think is historic in terms of bringing anti-Semitic white supremacists to justice, it was really meaningful. And I guess the last thing, during the trial, there was an opportunity for the victims' family members to tell the world about their lost ones and their loved ones. So instead of being another statistic of a mass murder, which unfortunately is sometimes what happens, I had an opportunity to hear these wonderful things about these wonderful people who were leading full and happy lives before the tragedy that took place on October 27th. And that was special, knowing that the world, anyone reading about the trial would get and got a chance to hear about these people.
And I know you weren't the only one who was attending the trial. There were people from your congregation, Dor Hadash, who showed up almost every day or took turns attending. How did folks make space for this in their day, day after day after day for 2 months?
Well, certainly part of it was that most of us who attended are retired. And so we had the space in terms of time to be there. Obviously, it was really difficult hearing and seeing these things. I think that basically, those of us who were just observers were able to support each other by talking to each other, by hugs, by tears. But I do think at the end of the day, this was primarily about support for the victims and the survivors. And speaking for Dor Hadash, Jerry Rabinowitz was a beloved member of our community. I don't think you'd find an individual, certainly not within Dor Hadash and probably not anywhere, who would have an unkind word to say about Jerry. And the same holds true for Dan Lager, who was seriously wounded, and for Marty Gaynor, who thankfully escaped without at least physical injury. And so to the extent we could support them, that was something we needed to do.
Tell me a little bit about your relationship with Jerry and what he was like.
I think what I'd probably be doing is confirming everything that's been said about Jerry since the day of the shooting. So I first met Jerry in, I'd say, 2010 or 2011 when I became a member of Dor Hadash. I was this stranger who kind of dropped in, and Jerry sat down next to me on the bench where you enter Tree of Life and started asking me questions like you might of somebody that you don't know. So are you a Pittsburgher? Why did you join Dor Hadash? Where were you before? Those sorts of questions. And during the entire conversation, he had that huge smile on his face that you've heard about since October 27th. And at one point during the conversation, I just interrupted him. I didn't know him. And I said, Jerry, are you really this happy all of the time? And how you've heard Jerry described is true. He just made you feel good. He made you smile. He made you feel happy because he was so happy. The other thing, I learned so much about Jerry after the fact, about what a caring and giving doctor he was, what a caring and giving person he was, how incredibly well-trained he was in his profession. And these are things you didn't know because Jerry himself would never talk about them. He was as humble as he was a brilliant physician.
Yeah, I think the story that really kind of circulated about him after October 27th was that during the early days of the AIDS, HIV crisis, he would hug his patients at a time when physicians wouldn't even treat, let alone touch people with HIV. And it seems like that really just captures who he was.
Yeah, and that's an example. I had never heard that story until Jerry's memorial service, and that just reflects who Jerry is, right? He would never share anything about himself as a sort of, look at me.
Hey, CityCast listeners, it's Megan. If you love good food, good drinks, and a healthy urban forest, you probably want to support Tree Pittsburgh at its annual celebration, Arborade. It's hosted at their beautiful 5-acre campus along the Allegheny River, and trust me, I have been before. It is a great time. General admission tickets are just $40, and they come with knowing that you're helping protect, support, and uplift generations of future Pittsburghers who deserve quality green space, and if they want, a beautiful tree in their own backyard. Mark your calendars for Arborade. That's Saturday, September 16th from 5 to 9 p.m. to celebrate the folks who are taking care of us through these trees and the mental, physical, and social benefits that they always provide. Check their website for more ticket options, including pay-what-you-can admission. That's at treepittsburgh.org.
What was it like for you as a member of one of these congregations to sit through this testimony, to see some of this evidence? I know for me, it was challenging to see images of spaces that I grew up in and felt so comfortable in it, where I learned to love Judaism and love the traditions and participate in the traditions, to see that all become evidence in a federal hate crime case.
Well, I mean, obviously it was extremely difficult. I'll mention that the couple of days of trial that I did choose to stay away from were the days when they showed the graphic crime scene photos and autopsy photos. So fortunately, I don't have those memories in my mind. But, for example, I want to preface this by saying, obviously, pictures involving the people who became victims or the survivors of shooting was the most difficult part of all. And so what I'm talking about is other photos that just happened to strike me. And one is something I knew nothing about until I heard the evidence and saw the photo at the trial, which is that at synagogues there are walls with memorial plaques on it that have the Hebrew date of death of your relative. And at Tree of Life, those plaques are located in a number of different places, but including on the walls outside Pervin Chapel. And there's a little teeny light bulb that is beside the person's name. And every year on the anniversary of their death, their Yortzeit date, someone from the synagogue goes and turns the candle on from sunset to sundown the following day. And one of the pictures that was shown in evidence was actually a bullet-ridden wall where there were holes through some of the plaques that were there. Mm-hmm. And that was actually the wall where my grandfather, there was a plaque for him there, Jacob Surloff. And so it was just at the moment when I saw that was jarring in a way, obviously, quite different from the real impact, but it was just something unexpected.
I think something that has sort of always been haunting about this to me is thinking about the very last time I was in that building before the attack. It was for a talk about the rise of white supremacy and white nationalism in this country in the wake of Charlottesville, when people were in the streets chanting, "Jews will not replace us." A member of your congregation, Dor Hadash, is an expert on white supremacy and white nationalism and was giving a talk to the congregation. And, I was not living in Pittsburgh at the time. I was living in Texas, but I happened to be home. And we went to that talk together, and thinking about how the last time I was in that space before the shooting was to hear about the rise in white supremacy in this country. And the next time I was in that building, it was to bear witness to what that led to. Has just been chilling to me.
Yeah, wow. It is to me. I didn't realize. I remember going to that talk with you. I didn't realize that was the last time you had been in the building before this shooting. Wow.
Yeah. So all of this brings us to last week. What was it like for you to hear the jury come to this verdict, decide that this man should receive, the most severe punishment under the law for this crime and should be sentenced to death.
I felt great relief both on the day of the death penalty verdict and on the day of the sentencing. And the reason I say that, and I'm not going to get into what my own personal views are on the death penalty or the views of various members of any of the congregations or the families, but what I will say is this. This defendant, in my opinion, got an extremely fair trial. He was provided with the top of defense counsel. Judy Clark, who represented him, is reputed to be one of the best, if not the best, death penalty defense attorney in the country. Judge Colville went out of his way to treat the defendant with respect and dignity, and make sure that he got a fair trial. And the prosecutors also did an incredible job. It was an extremely well-tried case. And the reason I felt relief is because our justice system worked.
So now, it's been nearly 5 years since the attack. What does it feel like at this point to have at least this chapter of the story come to a close?
For me personally, I'm really relieved that it has ended. It's been a long time in coming. I went both this past Friday night and Saturday to Erev Shabbat, which means the night before, and Shabbat services at one of the three congregations that lost its valued and loved members during the shooting. And the services were called healing services. They read Psalms. There was, just a very little bit of talk about moving forward, not moving on, but moving forward. And one person described it as being on a train for 4.5 years and getting off at the last stop and not knowing where you are, but knowing you have an open field ahead of you and you can begin to move forward. And so I know I felt a sense of relief, and I know in looking at people around me, I can't speak for them, but there was certainly a bit of a more lightness in the air than there had been just a couple short weeks ago.
And I know for you it's important to end where the story really begins, with the 11 people that were killed that day.
Right. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to say their names, which should never be forgotten. Joyce Feinberg, Richard Gottfried, Rose Mallinger, Jerry Rabinowitz, Cecil Rosenthal, David Rosenthal, Bernice Simon, Sylvan Simon, Dan Stein, Melvin Wax, and Irving Younger. May their memories be for a blessing.
Ellen Surloff was president of Dor Hadash congregation at the time of the attack and is still a member. She's also my mom. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with me.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mallory.
That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. We'll be back tomorrow with something totally different. Until then, take care.